You're listening to the North Parkway Podcast, weekly talks designed to help you take the next step in your spiritual journey. You can learn more about our church at northparkway.org. And if these talks are helpful to you, consider using the link in the description to give. Your financial support helps us continue to make great content. All right, well, that's enough intro. Let's get to today's talk. Imagine that you die tomorrow, and when you get to the entrance of heaven, just like every comic strip that you've ever seen, here's St. Peter standing at the pearly gates, and when you roll up to him, he kind of waves you over. He says, hey, come here a minute, come here. So you kind of skip the line, you go up to the front, and he says, listen, I'm so glad you're here. I really need to pee. Is there any chance you could just like cover for me for a minute so I can go hit the restroom? I'll be right back. And you're like, okay, it's kind of unexpected, but sure. And so you stand there at the gate and you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I've got the power. I've got the power, right? Yes, all right, we're making some changes around here. We're going to do things my way now. My way or the highway. I have all of these songs in my head. You realize you get to be in charge of what makes the cut to get into heaven and what gets out. I don't know about you, I think I would make some changes. Like when I look at the animal kingdom, there are some obvious things that if I'm in charge, they are not going to be in heaven for eternity with me. Things like mosquitoes, okay, fleas, ticks, basically anything that I need to spray DEET all over myself to go have fun outside, that's gone, right? We're done with those. Also chihuahuas, right? Gone. No. I like chihuahuas. I don't like this guy, right? Hey, let's be honest, okay? Unless you own a chihuahua, you don't want to spend eternity with every time somebody walks by. Gone. I'm in charge now. I get to boot out whatever songs that I don't want rolling through my head for all of eternity. Okay? Can anybody have a song that if you're in charge, it is banned in heaven? This will never be sung again. Right? Song that never ends. That's a real problem if you're in heaven and heaven never ends. Okay? Baby Shark, gone. Every jingle that you heard on the radio when you were a kid that took up space in your head without your permission, gone. Whopper, 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 Junior. No. Right? I'll eat the Whoppers. I don't want to sing the Whoppers. It would be fun to be in charge and decide what makes the cut and what doesn't. And of course, we know that it's not about songs, it's not about bugs, it's about people. We know that there are things that people choose to do that are absolutely not allowed in heaven. There are things that would make you unfit to enter heaven, right? There are a lot of obvious things like murder. Okay, murderers we don't want roaming around in heaven, and rapists and terrorists and sex traffickers and con artists. And the people who make those spam emails when you just enter your email address one time to sign up for something and they send 500 investment strategy. I don't want an investment strategy. Okay. We want to make the cut. I want to make the cut. All of us want to spend eternity with the Lord and doing things that are good. Today, as we launch this new series called Old School, I want to tell you about how God evaluates the good and the bad in us and what it takes to make the cut. And we're going to do it in this series. We're going to focus on looking at things from the Old Testament, the part of the Bible that was written before Jesus came to earth. Because I love teaching about Jesus. I love quoting him. I love these passages that Peter or Paul or John or James wrote to the church explaining what Jesus did. And we teach a lot out of the New Testament. But there's so much good in the Old Testament that sometimes we skip over. And the reality is there's a lot of truth in there. And so I want to take some time to look at that. We're going to start that today by looking at Hebrews chapter 11. Which is actually in the New Testament. We're going to start the Old Testament by looking at the New Testament. And the reason is because Hebrews 11 is sort of a greatest hits album of Old Testament heroes. It's like the Hall of Fame roster of all of the guys and girls that did amazing things in the Old Testament. And we have this whole chapter where the writer of Hebrews, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is listing all of these characters and say, be like him, be like him, be like her. So it seems like a logical place to have an overview before we dive into all of these fine print individual stories. Hebrews 11 is full of the regular characters that you would expect. Guys like Noah and Moses. Guys like Daniel, who was in the lion's den, and David, the king who slayed Goliath. But it's also, and here's what's interesting today, the chapter is also filled with people you wouldn't expect to be in a Be Like Them series. Murderers, adulterers, slave owners, hate crime committers, arsonists, liars, con men. All of those are also in Hebrews 11, and here's the weirdest part of all of it. The murderers, the liars, the con men, they're also the people that you know well. Those are the names. They're not side by side with the good guys. They are the good guys. Let me show you. Okay. Noah is listed in this roster. Noah, the guy who built the ark and saved humanity, is also the guy that got so hammered, drunk on his own brew of wine, his sons found him passed out naked in his tent. That is awkward. How would you like to have your worst bender recorded in the Bible for all of human history? All right, one day Roger got so drunk he just laid naked in his... Okay, that would be really embarrassing. And yet he's in there. Sorry, Rod, I'm sure that's never happened to you. Okay. Abraham, right? Anybody who grew up in kids' church? Father Abraham had many sons, right? Abraham also had sex with one of his slaves. And she got pregnant, and his wife got so upset about it that in order to make his wife happy, he kicked this slave and her son out into the wilderness to starve to death. That guy is in the chapter. It's full of issues. It's full of people with brokenness. Jacob, the guy who got his name changed to Israel, the literal namesake of the nation of Israel, was a con man who repeatedly cheated people out of stuff by lying. Moses, the guy who parted the Red Sea, and Moses didn't just kill somebody, he committed a racially motivated murder. Okay? You want to talk about hate crimes? That was him. Rahab was a literal prostitute. Okay? You ever wonder why the spies that were sent to investigate Jericho ended up at Rahab's house? It's not because they were asking for directions. She's a prostitute. She's in there. Gideon, who did great stuff and led the army of Israel, took the winnings from his conquest, built an idol, and started having people worship at his house instead of at the tabernacle. Samson was an arsonist, a womanizer, and a frequenter of prostitutes. David, the king who slayed Goliath, also seduced one of his best friend's wives while he was out of town. And then when she got pregnant, he had his friend killed to cover up what he did. And this is my favorite, which is a really weird thing to say when you're talking about people's issues. I should have picked a different word, okay? The most interesting to me, it's in there, you can read it, a guy named Jephthah. Now, you know Moses. You probably have never heard of Jephthah, okay? He's also in this list of heroes, this Hall of Fame roster. Jephthah was an illegitimate son of a prostitute who went out and formed a gang of bandits, and he killed his own daughter. Did I lose my mic here? We still have that? Okay. And he killed his own daughter in cold blood. Hey, how about that for a Hall of Fame? Okay, these people every one of them, they all have issues. And if you're me, you're hearing this and you're like, okay, how is that the Hall of Fame? Is this off? Did we lose it? Bring that mic up here. We'll just switch. Is that red? Okay. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. We'll go to this one.
All right, if you're looking at this list of people, make sure that we're good for our online folks too. Okay. If you're looking for this list, you're like, how is this a Hall of Fame? This is, any baseball fans, this is like an entire Hall of Fame of Pete Roses. They're supposed to be kicked out. How is this the list? And how is this in the Bible as be like him, be like him, be like her, when they've all got major issues? There's something important that we learn by reading this. And it's something that I want you to write down. So if you've got YouVersion Live on your phone, this will be in there. If you're filling in the blanks live here in the room, you can write this in. We'll put it up here on the screen. We learn this. Every good guy has a dark side. Every single one. When you look through the Bible, every good guy in the Bible has a dark side. Everyone who did stuff right also did stuff wrong and has brokenness inside of them. Real life, and I love superhero stuff. I watched like the whole Marvel universe, all the way up there for a long time. Real life has no Captain Americas. Okay? There are none of those. Real life is all the Punisher. He's a good guy who sometimes I think maybe he's a little bit of a bad guy. Okay? And that's what we see in the Bible time and time again. You have these people with stuff that's broken. And what is so valuable by looking at that is that when I look at the things that they did as ancient people living on the other side of the world, I realize they're actually not that different from you and me. Because I look at the heroes and I see what their brokenness are. It's things like alcoholism. It's stuff like infidelity. There are things like fudging the truth or lying to get what you really want. I see men who abuse and take advantage of women. I see women who abuse and take advantage of men's attraction to them. And I say, well, they're really not all that different. That's the same stuff that we have today. Those are the same problems today. There's a valuable lesson when I see that. We'll put that up on the screens too. Okay? Human nature never changes. The details change. But the core motivations in there, they never really change. And when you read these stories from the Old Testament, we're going to spend all summer looking at different characters and seeing what we can learn. I want to lay the groundwork for that. Every single one of them that we look at, they have brokenness deep down inside of them, just like we do. Hate crime is not something new, and it's not something exclusive to America. Okay. Moses killed the dude because he was beating an Israelite, and he was an Israelite himself. All of these things, these people who are heroes from the Bible have things that are just as bad as some of the villains from the Bible. And when I look at that, I say, okay, how does that work then? God, why would you pick those people, or why would you record that stuff about those people? But when I actually read what the Bible says about these guys, I get a clue. So let me read part of that. We'll put it up on the screens here. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city. And it goes on and on listing these people. Do you notice what I don't see listed in Hebrews? Hebrews doesn't mention that Noah got stone drunk and laid out naked. Hebrews doesn't mention that David slept with his friend's wife. Hebrews doesn't mention all of these things. It points out something different in them. And we see this when we come back over here. We see this in verse 39. Okay? All of these people earned a good reputation. They earned a good reputation. They were remembered differently, not because of what they did wrong. All of these people earned a good reputation because of their, you say it, because of their faith. And see, all of these people did great exploits. But Hebrews said they didn't earn a good reputation because they won the battle. They didn't earn a good reputation because they did some good things. They earned a reputation because, go back there, they earned a reputation because of their faith. And that's good news for people like you and me if we find ourselves with a lot in common with these ancient people. It's good news. And here's what else I want you to write down, okay? You are not defined by your faults. You're defined by your faith. Just like all of these flawed people that we see, just like all of these people who had brokenness and issues, and they played out differently than they do with you and I. They're different problems, but really at the core, they're the same problems. And just like them, you are not ultimately defined by your faults. You're defined by your faith. See, we have this weird idea in our society, and maybe this has been you, maybe this still is you. I've seen this over and over again, where we think of getting into heaven. Okay, what do I need to do to clear the bar and make it into heaven? What do I need to do to be on God's good list in this earth? What do I need to do to get God to listen to my prayers? What do I need to do for God to be happy with me? And we tend to see it as sort of a balance, a scales. And we say, okay, I know that there's a fair amount of bad in my life that's weighing down. So if I do enough good on the other side of the scale, it will outweigh the bad in my life. And if that were the case, some of these guys, I could totally see them being in there. Okay, Noah, we know, it's making your own wine and getting drunk on it is a bad idea. But the dude built the boat and literally is responsible for saving the human race from extinction. I think he did enough good to outweigh the bad, right? That seems fair. Some of these guys, the bad's pretty bad. But the Bible doesn't say Moses did enough good for the nation of Israel to outweigh murdering a guy. It said he was in that list because of his faith. And entrance into heaven is not because of doing enough good. Here's what it's about. Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 1. The Bible says this, "You were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world." All of us. Okay, that's you, that's me, that's the guy writing this. Paul is one of the great heroes of the New Testament. He says, all of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. For it's by grace you have been saved through, there's that word again, faith. It's by grace, it's by God's grace to you that you have been saved through your faith. And this is not from yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Why does Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, why does he write that? Why does he specify you're not saved by working hard enough for God? It's because you and I have a tendency to believe that. If I do enough good, it'll outweigh the bad. Now, I want to be really clear. It is important to do good, okay? You need to do good. You need to honor God with your life. If you belong to him, if you say, "Great are you, Lord, it's your breath in my lungs," okay, if you're singing that stuff, if he's your Lord, he does get to boss you around, and you should do your best. But all of us, like these heroes in the Bible, all of us have brokenness and flaws. We all mess stuff up. And it is really good news that God still evaluates people that way. So earlier we wrote down that human nature never changes. I want you to write this down. In the same way, God's nature never changes. God is the same. His character is the same. This whole series, as we look through the Old Testament, we're going to see elements of God's character. And his character and his values, they never change. That's good news because that means if God evaluates Moses because of his faith and not because of his faults, then God evaluates you because of your faith and not because of your faults. There is no amount of trying to do enough good to outweigh the bad. It's not about that anymore. And in full view of their flaws, God listed these people who had major issues and said, yes, but at the end of the day, they had faith in me. They were servants of mine, and they served me even in their brokenness, and I approved them, and I've invited them to join in their reward. This list of people in Hebrews, these are people who are in heaven today cheering you on and saying, don't give up. Flawed people. So when I look at that, in light of that, there are two things that I want to take away from this thought. Okay, just, well, God doesn't evaluate you because of your faults. That's good. What do I do with that? Let me show you two ways to put the rubber to the road this week based on that truth. The first one is this. Write this down in your notes. Don't look up to your role models. Look forward. What does that mean? Don't look up to your role models. Don't look up to your role models. Don't look up to those people, those mentors in your life, the people who seem to do it right, the people who are further along the path. Don't look up to them. Look forward. Here's what I mean. All of us, whether it was your big brother, whether it was your mom or your aunt who stepped in when mom maybe didn't have things together, maybe it was a coach, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a social worker, maybe it was a political figure, maybe it was your youth pastor. All of us at some point in life have seen someone who is more mature than us, and we've said, I want to be like them. I want to do it like them. And there's value in that. We need mentors. I have people that I have leaders, strong Christian men and pastors. My dad is one of those. Roy Rhodes is one of those. I have these guys that I say, man, I want to pattern my life after them. But it's important when I do that I don't put them up on a pedestal that's 3 steps higher than where I am and say, they don't have problems, they don't have flaws. They might have been broken like I am, but they fixed everything and now they're just like Jesus, because what inevitably happens to people that we put on pedestals? They fall. And the higher the pedestal is, the more damage that's done when they fall. And when you put people up there and say, they're not like me, they don't make mistakes, they've got it all figured out, when they fall, you lose faith in humanity. When the pastor that you do, I grew up with this pastor, has a moral failure, it doesn't just like, well, that's a bummer, let's find a new church. It's like, if pastor whatever can't do that, what chance do I have? One of the most lethal toxins, okay, I learned this week. This is a little bonus piece. If you like garlic-infused olive oil, do not make it at home. Legitimately, like buy it, okay? Because if you grind up garlic and you put it in oil and you sit it out on the shelf, it begins to grow this bacteria that doesn't grow in most other things, and at a high enough level, it creates this toxin that could kill you if it sits out on the table for a week. A tiny amount, 40 grams, they said 40 grams of this toxin is enough to kill every human on the planet. It's highly toxic, okay? That's free bonus content. Okay? Disillusionment is a highly toxic element that has crushed so many people's Christian walk. Because they believed in somebody, and when that person had a great fall, they said, well, if they can't do it, I can't either. And if they fell, then everything they ever taught me is also suspect. Look forward to the people who are further along the path than you are, but understand they're just as broken as you are, okay? And that's this guy too. Listen, I'll come back up in a minute, Kate, okay? I'm on an equal playing field with you. I am not somehow impervious to the things that you are. I'm not somehow, well, Pastor Chris doesn't have any problem. Okay. I'm just as tempted by all of these things you are. And I'm just as likely to mess stuff up as you are. We're all in this together. Every good guy has a dark side, but we're not evaluated by that. So don't look up to your role models, look forward. Last thing to write down is this. And before you put that up on the screens, hang on. keeping you on your toes, okay? I believe this as I was preparing this. I believe that some of you are in this room today just so that you can hear this. Some of you happen to be watching today. This is the day that you decided, let me fire it up, just so that you could hear that. I really believe this, so I want you to lean in and listen, okay? Put that up on the screens. I want you to write this down. If God doesn't measure you, it doesn't measure your worth by your faults, then neither should you. If God is in heaven and he's saying the thing that Dan is worth is not what he's done right or wrong, but his faith in me. If God is up in heaven saying, I'm evaluating Julie based on her relationship with me and not her doing enough good to outweigh the bad. If God is evaluating your worth by your faith and not your faults, then who are you to determine your self-worth based on your faults? We all have a tendency to do that. And as Mark comes back up, that's been me too. Because every one of us has a dark side. Every one of us has brokenness in us because we are still living on this planet. We are still humans who are flawed. And sometimes those flaws are more visible in different ways than others. Okay, the truth is, some of you in this room, online, some of you, you know your flaws, your spouse knows your flaws, your parents know them, your classmates know them, everybody knows your issues. They're just wide open for everybody to see. And for some of you, that awareness, everyone knowing that you've made a mistake, everyone knowing you're struggling with addiction, everyone knowing that you're the one who cheated on your wife, everybody knowing that you're the one who had to do time for cheating on your whatever it is. Your flaws have hijacked your whole identity, and that's become who you are now. I'm Craig the screw-up. That's who I am. Some of you, those flaws, that dark side is something that's in your past. There was a time, there was a season when you were way off the map, doing wrong and bad. And some of you have worked so hard to try to rehabilitate your credibility. Some of you, you changed towns, you changed churches. It's a different family now. You're like, I'm a different person, but in the back of your mind, you're like, man, I hope that my new friends don't find out what I used to be like because they may not be my friends anymore. They may judge me because of that. Some of you, you would benefit greatly from being in Celebrate Recovery on a Thursday night, but you're like, nah, I don't want to go because nobody thinks that I've got struggles with this or that I used to have struggles with that. And you're worried that that past might catch up to you. And there are some of us in the room here, online, that the only people that know the dark side in you are you and Jesus. And the people around you have you on a 6-foot pedestal because they're like, man, Peggy would never, Brenda would never, Frank would never. And the truth is, you are just as flawed as any other human. And instead of trying to rehab your street credibility, you live with the weight of expectations where everyone says they have to be perfect, they don't have mistakes, and you know that you're not. No matter what your dark side looks like to others or to yourself, you need to understand that every hero in the Bible has a dark side, even Jesus. Jesus didn't have a dark side. Jesus is God on earth. Jesus did everything right. Jesus had the darkest of darks, the bleakest of bleaks. 2 Corinthians 5:21, we'll put it up here on the screens. It says, God made Christ, who knew no sin, listen to this, to be sin on our behalf. I want you to think about this. Some of you have really messed some stuff up in your life. You have never become sin. You may have committed a sin. God says that when Christ was nailed to the cross, every sin of humanity, every crime that's listed on the list, everything that people have done up until this point, bizarre ways to sin that we haven't even invented yet. And every one of those is on Jesus. As he's nailed to the cross, dying, he became sin on our behalf. And here's why: so that in him we could become the righteousness of God. Jesus took on the darkest of dark sides so that it's not you being good enough that helps you to measure up. It's not you doing it right that allows you to make the cut. He paid for all of that stuff so that you and I are judged not by our faults, but by our faith. And if you're hyper aware of your faults, you need to know they don't define you. One day you will die. Or if Jesus comes back to collect the church before you die, you'll still face the judgment of Christ. Every person will stand before God. And when you die, when you're at the entrance to heaven, it won't be St. Peter who's standing at the gate. It will be Jesus. And the question will not be, Vicky, did you do enough good to outweigh the bad? The question will not be, Robert, did you give enough in church? Did you tell enough people about Jesus? The question will be, did we know each other? Do you know me? Jesus said, when I have that final judgment day, a lot of people are going to come and they're going to say, Lord, look at all this stuff I did for you. Look at all this stuff I did for the church. I was such a good Christian. And he will look them in the face and say, I don't even know you. You don't belong in here. Because it's not about doing enough good. Every hero, every good guy, every person who does it right, we all have a dark side. But God is not judging you by your darkness. He doesn't evaluate your worth by your flaws. It's by your faith. So give the people that you look up to permission to be as flawed as you are. And give yourself permission to be both flawed and a faith-filled follower of Jesus.
Hey, this is Pastor Chris again. Thanks for listening. If today's talk was helpful in your spiritual life, odds are there's someone you know who could benefit from it. Take a minute right now to share it with them. And if you live in the area, come try out a service in person, because church is more fun with friends. See you next time.